meeting on the 29th of March. Could we please open with our karakia, whakataka? Please join in. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hiaki ana te ātakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, nōri ora. Kia ora, thank you everyone. And a special welcome to our guests in the chamber, Barry Jones. Kia ora, Barry, and Fiona McTavish from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. Kia ora kōrua. Also, our participants online, tēnā koutou katoa, all our councillors here, as well as our brilliant Hawke's Bay Regional Council staff, tēnā koutou katoa. So apologies, I have apologies from Tanya Hopmans, but is replaced by Kiri Ropiha. Apologies from Mike Paku. And I think that is it. Any other apologies? Yeah, none. I'm happy to move those apologies. Can I please have a seconder? Councillor McIntosh. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you very much. In terms of housekeeping, if there is an earthquake, drop, cover and hold, and then evacuate out your nearest exits up to the Tiffin Park along Dalton Street towards the hill. In the case of a fire, out the exit and meet on the green areas just out the front on the corner. So, next item is conflict of interest declarations. Are there any conflict of interest declarations in today's items? None, thank you. Confirmation of the 8th and the 22nd of March meeting minutes. Are there any alterations that need to be had? If there are none, thank you. Can I have a mover? Councillor Van Beek and Councillor Harding. Thank you. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. So we're on to decision item 4, which is our financial delegations. Can I please have Susie introduce the paper and move us through that? Thanks.
Thank you. So this paper, Financial Delegations, is seeking to obtain necessary delegations to authorise any borrowing of new debt to the Chief Executive and to the Group Manager Corporate Services underneath our Treasury policy. Now, I want to assure you this paper is actually a matter of formality. We have subsequently identified through the process of obtaining LGFA funding, etc., and looking at overdraft limits in preparation for payment of cyclone payments, that actually the Treasury policy requires new debt to be signed off by the Council. Given the need to access debt at the current time, we are proposing to delegate that to the CE and GM Corporate Services. There is no new I want to assure you, though, that what we are seeking is debt within those limits already approved in the LTP. So we are not seeking debt outside of any already approved limits that have come through there in public consultation. We are just seeking at an operational level that authority to obtain chunks, for use of a better word, of money through the process can be delegated to CE and to Group Manager Corporate Services. So please, I see this paper as a matter of formality, just to seek that delegation, and I'll take the rest as read.
Thanks, Susie. Pretty straightforward. Do we have questions for Susie? Councillor Harding.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Susie. Look, just in terms of making sense of that, given that we've got, higher short-term cash flow requirements than we had because of cyclone-related expenses. The reason why we can stay within that LTP debt limit is I believe, and you can reassure me or tell me otherwise, because of underspend in some of the capital projects that we're running behind. Is that the main reason?
Yep, 100%. Yep, that's exactly right. So, yep, we are currently tracking well behind in our debt, actual debt at the moment taken. So, yeah, there is quite a bit of headroom up to the 104. as per the annual plan.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor
Just
Curtin?
on that point, is there any sense that you may exceed that, and or should we provide a delegation beyond the current parameters in the LTP?
Yeah, good point. So we talked about that internally at this stage. Our preference is to stick within that annual plan number because should we go outside of that, we may trigger the significant engagement policy and require engagement and consultation. So at this stage, we would prefer to stay within those limits, and we actually don't think at the moment we are going to trigger those limits for quite some time. We will present something in due course back to you should that position change through annual planning and sign off of annual plan position.
Any other questions? Well, we have 3 recommendations here. The third most important around the delegations that have just been commented on.
I'll move, Madam Chair.
Are you happy to move, Councillor Curtin, and a seconder, Councillor Harding? Would you like to speak to that, Councillors? No other comment? All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. Our next item is the Cyclone Recovery Committee establishment. Kia ora, Louise. Louise is our new recovery manager for Hawke's Bay Regional Council, assisted by Desiree. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, council members. So you've got Louise as recovery manager and myself as the author of the paper, which we'll take as read, and happy to answer any questions. The only suggested amendment we'd like to table today is in the terms of reference, we proposed the membership would include 2 appointed members of the Māori Committee and 2 appointed members of the Regional Planning Committee, and we'd like to change that to up to address, to give them more flexibility and address their capacity issues.
Yes. I think that's a beneficial change. And that leaves it open for those tangata whenua reps to decide. Thank you. Maybe just a brief summary of the establishment of a recovery committee. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. The recovery committee is proposed to assist and direct staff for the first establishment of a regional resilience plan and then longer term implementation of that plan. My role as the recovery manager will be the conduit of information back to this organisation from the regional recovery agency, which is being established in Hawke's Bay, and to liaise with the other recovery managers from the other councils. So I will be able to answer the questions that you have, coordinate internally with the other as group managers and managers within the organisation to make sure that all the tasks that we need to do in our recoveries is being done to the timeframes required, and that the reporting comes back to the recovery committee.
Thank you, Louise. Do we have questions for Louise or Desiree? Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Thank you, Louise. Desiree. Just a question on the regional resilience plan. Could you just explain the statutory other basis for that plan? Thank you.
So it's not completely clear yet where that will sit. We're still waiting for guidance, which had been indicated to us we would have had by now from the Regional Recovery Agency, but it hasn't materialised yet. So we are approaching it as it is our resilience plan that we will then, initially it's a state of the nation of what's happened and what we need to do as an organisation, where that will lead into our other plans, what that might look like for our freshwater planning and longer term LTP. There's some legislation that might be changed to allow us to adapt different approaches to our other types of planning, and the resilience plan will look at that and feed into those other statutory plans.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think given that comment, which is really pertinent to the flexibility around our terms of reference and needing to adapt as things change and the environment changes, given that we're all working at pace across councils. Yeah. Councillor Curtin.
Morning. Good afternoon,
Williams.
please. It's been a long morning. Sorry to raise something that's devilishly tricky, but I just want to get an understanding of how our regional resilience plan, which is the prime responsibility of a repackaged environment committee to become a recovery committee, would interface with decisions of the extreme weather event committee of central government around issues that are vexing our communities at the moment. And maybe there is no answer to this yet, but I'd ask the question, so how would our recovery plan that's sort of built from the region up interface with decisions that central government might be making around managed retreat, or the old terminology of red zoning? Have we got any understanding of that at the moment? And the second part of that is, how would we ensure opportunity for local community input into those processes? I know we're giving information to government at the moment around some of their decision making around risk. Just can you paint us a little bit of a picture around that? And I know it's a tricky one, so I'm not expecting miracles.
Yes.
I'm happy to help kick that answer off. So certainly the responsibility for that managed retreat sits at the central government level. My understanding, and there have been public announcements, that is April there will be some announcements like that.
Yep.
So I think the opportunity to feed information through the recovery agency into government is probably not there, because the agency needs to be established and it's only in the preliminary stages of being established. Certainly the regional council and the district councils are providing advice into government through MFE and Treasury. And so we're putting advice together, which is really just the existing hazard information that we have into the government process for them to make that decision. So, it is happening at pace, and I think it's unlikely that that'll feed through the recovery agency into government, and our information will go direct through MFE as one of the principal advisors on that matter.
All right. And it's just a matter of, I guess, the other part of the question, I see Katrina's come up, she may have a view on this as well, is drawing the link between our recovery spatial planning function, community voice into that, and how it might connect with the process coming from the other end.
Through you, Chair. So the policy team have been having discussions, the policy team are about to have discussions, largely beginning with our PSGEs. It's a conversation that we have been having internally at the moment about how do we facilitate how do we provide data, information, a platform, so be it, for our PSGs and our communities to engage in the locality planning process. And so we are trying to work at pace on that, led ably by Louise. And so I have only just today reached out to our co-chair of the RPC, Tanya Hopmans, and asked to begin that conversation with her. I suspect that that's where we need to start and work from there. Essentially, as Louise has said, there isn't any real clarity at this point in time on how this is all going to work. Even the locality plans that the TLAs are preparing, there's no clarity on that at the moment as well. So really, for this organisation, it's about being best dressed very quickly and being able to allow the community to have access to all the data and information that we have so that they can then build those locality plans.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. Councillor Curtin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Following on from Councillor Williams' excellent observation on that community voice, I'm just wanting to make sure, and I note in the paper that at paragraph 9, there was a proposal to increase tangata whenua membership by one appointed member of the Māori Committee and the Regional Planning Committee. As we know, that's fraught with difficulties in itself to try and get representation on to affected communities. I'm not sure how that would transact, and I wonder whether, Katrina, you could comment on the utility of the Kotahi Plan catchments, which we've got some visibility on, as being a framework to connect with communities, and as they're already identified catchments and likely to be locations where significant effect of flooding has occurred.
Through Chair, I'm not quite sure what the question is.
Question?
I have to apologise.
So no, it's fine. I'll rephrase it. We've got communication's key. We're needing to communicate with affected communities very significantly. We already have stood up our Kotahi catchments,
Yes.
which have a structure around.
Yes.
Is there potential to leverage those already existing structures, for the want of a better term, to involve the tangata whenua and the PSGs, etc., at that level? So it's a channel for communication and discovery with those
Yes.
with those catchments.
So through you, Chair, yes, I think the answer is yes. And that's the conversation that I wanted to start with Tanya Hopman, so yes.
Chair?
Kia ora. Yes,
to
of
that.
course.
I've already had discussions with Louise in terms of taking advantage of existing instruments or platforms, as we might term them. And part of the Kotahi Plan process has been engaging our relationship managers, and beyond them also is the Te Kupenga network, which links across all 5 councils. That is available to reach into those communities, as we found during the response phase of Gabriel.
Fantastic. Has that
Thank you.
addressed all your
Thank you.
questions, Councillor Curtin? Councillor Sears.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I think the conversations highlighted some of the issues that Louise is alluding to, which is we're not aware completely now of how the structure is going to work. As Councillor Williams raises, our capacity to influence or make comment into these different parts of it's going to be a really critical part of how the recovery works, whether through this committee or as Chris says, directly through the ministries. I think what's really important to note is that it's the standing up of the recovery committee so that we are ready to start to process this work, and more importantly, how well we are working as 5 councils across all the TAs and us. I know Louise has already been in contact with all the recovery managers, that we are, as a region of 5 councils, really closely working together, conscious of the work that needs to be done for recovery across our community and our environment. And there's no doubt that all of those contacts that you raise, Neil and Piri, all of those contacts we have and relationships that we have, we're going to be leveraging to make sure we get into all parts of our community. But I do take Councillor Williams' point. We don't actually specifically, in our terms of reference, talk about our role as the community engager or connector, or we haven't really made that specific, and maybe that's something we could add if we thought that was valuable, because we don't always sit down and read our terms of reference, but it's important that the things that matter to us are in there. So would we like to add a line, or maybe I think about it while other people are talking, something that notes our purpose, part of our purpose is to ensure not just community recovery, but community engagement or close community connections or something in that way? Community voice. And that could be a way of just making sure that we have a reference there. Thank you, Chair.
There's probably 2 options to go forward in terms of your suggestion, and that is to add it now, if we have the wording available to us right now, or it can be a part of the first workshop where some of these more detailed aspects can be worked through in the first workshop, because there are quite a few here in terms of the next steps for this committee. So you are proposed as the chair, is that something that can, it can maybe be workshopped at a beginning stage?
Yes, certainly, yeah.
Thank you.
A
Councillor
suggestion on that,
Williams.
Chair, is that under implementation, we could say that in the formation of our recovery or our regional resilience plan, we will apply opportunities to determine and express community voice, something like that. But that could be wordsmithed later.
That could be
But I
wordsmithed
see
later.
it as implementation.
I think it just highlights the importance of community voice into the structure, and we could possibly workshop where it best fits and the best wording for that. Councillor Fanby?
Yeah, so I think community is a very broad, and I think it needs to be wordsmithed. Community is a very broad term, and when Councillor Curtin asked the question, PSG's tangata whenua, straight away that came to the fore, and that is then the answer. But I sincerely hope that we're actually working with the community that actually lives and works in that space. And we actually need to give some indication on how we're actually going to engage with that community. It's easy to deal with PSGs. We work with them all the time through the RPC and other means, but not with the community that now has been affected. So we need to make real I need to have real surety from our staff, and that what we put actually in wordsmith, that actually is very clear how we're going to do that and who we mean by that, so that, for instance, tonight, although too soon, when I actually meet with the community, that I actually can give them confidence that they are the people that we're actually going to communicate with, and that we're actually going to get their input. Very important.
Thank you. Very good point. We have Kiri Ropiha. Kia ora.
Through you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to probably be in support of what was just said. I guess, as you might be able to see on my screen, I am a community coordinator for our hub here in Porangaho. We've been up and running for 6 weeks. We're all still here in a voluntary capacity. We've just stood up 20 jobs today through MSD Task Force to help clean up our marae and to keep our kitchen running. And we're still doing 150 meals a day here to support the community that are displaced from their homes. So my question was around exactly what was just brought up, is how will we get a surety that those of us here on the ground that are dealing with the day-to-day repercussions of this disaster are going to be able to have some kind of input into any plans that are done or any information that comes forward. We have a ton of data that we have captured for all of our residents since we've been doing this. So I guess I was looking for some assurity that community aspect will actually be with the communities that are in the affected areas, rather than maybe representative groups that aren't actually here.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you, Kiri. And you're happy for that to be workshopped to provide clarity. Kia ora. Mike Paku? Kia ora.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Thank you. Are you hearing me all right?
Yes, we can.
Apologies.
Oh, no. You're a bit sketchy there.
Great here. Just to say, you hear me all right?
You might want to turn off your camera so that the vocals are clear.
Oh. Hope that's better.
Yep, that's far better.
Better looking, Charlie.
Must be my face.
Continue, Mike.
Just wanted to say that. It was in regards to Hastings District Council went through the same thing, same kind of conversation that's just taking place here. The outcome of that was the realisation that each area has been affected in different ways. No two areas were affected the same way, and so therefore it became very clear to us that are involved with their recovery plan that we had to work in zones rather than in catchments. And it is about what, as the last two speakers have said, is to capture what does the recovery look like for that particular community, that particular group of people who have been affected by the cyclone. which will be slightly different to someone who's down the road further, who had a different experience and who will have a different experience to come. Remembering that what we see today will be different for what it looks like in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, or 18 months' time. So the plan has to have the flexibility to change. So I look forward to workshopping that. Kia ora, thank you, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, Mike, thank you for that. Are there any other questions or comments for this item, particularly the terms of reference?
Sorry,
Councillor Williams.
Have one, sorry to be a pest, but I understand that this was modelled on the EICC terms of reference.
Yes.
And we've added the Cyclone Gabriel recovery responsibilities, paragraphs 5 and 6. Paragraph 7 looks very like previous 1.2, 1.1 to 1.4 with one omission. I'm wondering if it was deliberate. At the moment, the lead policy, the 7.1, is policies with regard to council responsibilities in flood protection and drainage. That's all sensible, but the EICC one had before that carbon reduction and climate change adaptation and mitigation policies and strategies developed to guide the establishment of work plans. Was that a deliberate?
Well, yes, it was. When this was workshop, it was decided that its natural home would be in the future Joint Climate Action Committee, which is why that's been removed. We didn't want to double up, basically.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
And that's cross-council.
No other questions or comments? Okay, well, we have recommendations here. We have 4 recommendations, and the major recommendations are to appoint or adopt this proposed terms of reference and appoints the Cyclone Recovery Committee under Clause 30 of Schedule 7 of the Local Government Act. So that's to establish the committee. I please call for a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Sears as the mover and a seconder.
Seconder.
Councillor Williams. Would you like to speak, Councillor Sears?
Thank you.
Councillor Williams. Any other speakers? As there are none, all those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Kia ora. Now we have item 6, annual freshwater science charges. Kia ora, Chris. Kia ora, Amy. Welcome back.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, please take us away.
Okay, we will take the paper as read. Basically, we're coming here to say freshwater science charges for the 22-23 year are due to be issued, and we're seeking a council view or decision on the approach that we take to those given the impacts of Cyclone Gabriel.
Thank you. Do we have questions for Chris or Amy?
I had a question just to understand, I guess, the rationale and logic behind the shift from the type of monitoring that we're doing in a water quality context under a BAU versus the type of monitoring we would do in response to the cyclone within our stream catchments and rivers. That in terms of paragraph 17 of the paper, pivots that towards a wider public benefit than assumed in our long-term plan. Is there a response to that?
Kia ora, Chair, through you, I can respond to that. So, Councillor, broadly there are kind of 2 components to our water quality program, one of which is our State of the Environment program, State and Trends, and the other is specific investigations relative to catchments in areas of interest, both from a consented activity and a policy development proposal, or process rather. So what's proposed to continue is the State of the Environment component of the work, pretty much as it needs to and is required under the Resource Management Act. The piece that has changed is that the
impacts of the cyclone on our freshwater environments has been so significant and severe that we are going to have to go and re-baseline all of our water quality across the whole region. So that's a component of work that has to happen, which is kind of a public good piece of work, if you like. It has broad community benefit. And then the work that will flow from that is to look at the post-event impact and how systems are recovering, what state they're in, how they're recovering, what we could do to accelerate recovery in stream, and then, bulk perhaps policies and programs of work around those. The type of work, and again, that's a broader community good, public interest type of science. The pieces of work that will be significantly scaled back or stop will be specific pieces of work that might look at areas or catchments like the tuki and understanding things like dissolved and organic nitrogen in stream, monitoring those and reporting those through to consent holders in a catchment who are required to work with council to ensure that those in-stream limits are achieved. That work will be significantly scaled back for a period of time, not forever. And that work is the sort of work that would have attracted science charges and have that private-public benefit spread between them. So it's that work that stops, that type of work that stops in deference to the broader public good research that needs to pick up for a period of time.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Madam Chair, just pursuing that a little more, Ian, we're currently the split in terms of science output is 65% public good and 35% attributable to the consent holder. So your assumption or the conclusion drawn from a shift away from that specific catchment-related science towards a broader, you called it a reset baseline for impacts in the catchments. I'm trying to understand how you arrive at a position that says that therefore invokes wider public good elements when in fact the consent holders will equally benefit from that. So we're talking about a division of the 35% that's currently attributable to consent holders, if you like, clawing back or the folding back into the public good component. You've drawn a conclusion that all of that repivoted science should fall by way of public good. Had you considered the consent holder benefits that equally emerge from that pivot in science output?
So, through you, Chair, perhaps the easiest way to answer that question would be to explain that some of the programs of science are driven by the fact that there are consented activities operating in a catchment, and particularly in a water quality space, because what we need to understand is the effect of those consented activities on our in-stream environment. So that drives the science requirement, monitoring work to then work out whether the impacts are what we predicted, to understand changes in water quality and whether we need to change the policy and consent settings for those consented activities. So the fact the work is happening is driven by the fact that there is a consented activity occurring in the catchment. So that's the framing. And therefore, that consented activity, or number of parties who are consented for that activity, contribute 35% of the cost of the science because they've created the work, if you like, or generated a necessity for the work. 65% of it is covered by the general rate, recognising the fact that there's value and benefit in those businesses operating in those catchments and the value they add to our economy and our society generally. So that's the kind of differentiation. What's changing is that those sorts of programs will either pause or slow down substantively to be replaced by bodies of work that have been driven purely by the fact that we've had a cyclone impact the region and we now need to understand what state the region is in and how it's going to recover over time and how we can support that recovery. That hasn't been driven by any consented activity. That's an act of God. And that's the public good component.
The point I'm making is that it's inevitable that piece of research and science will have a proportionate component that will derive benefit to the consent holders as well as the public good. So should it not, the logic of this be that we assign some of the, if you like, the outputs and the science cost to that back to those consent holders in any event. And on top of that, the proposition is that we partition the fees on a calendar basis so that we've got 42% remaining that is repivoted, when in fact we've got a standing army of scientists doing this work. Those costs will be accrued anyway, and the outcome will be to the ultimate benefit of consent holders in the proportion of 65-35 in any event.
Through you, Chair, I think perhaps we're starting to kind of litigate the Section 36 policy. I would not argue against the notion that there are some benefits accrue to any individual in terms of the science that we do. However, the policy framing at the moment says that unless it's attributable, that the work is attributable to a consented activity, you can't recover that from those individuals, because on what basis would you do that? Equally, not all of our science is Section 36 recovered. There's a lot of our science that is purely public funded from the general rate. It's only the water quality and quantity components that attract Section 36 charges, so there is a lot of our science activity that is funded through the general rate. And I guess all I can do is reiterate that it's not a specific individual or activity that's generated the need for the work, it's Mother Nature. Perhaps the final point would be the state of the environment work that carries on will absolutely continue to attract those charges, so that work stays the same.
Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Staff, Amy, Chris, congratulations on a really well thought out paper that really attempts to be very faithful, I think, to the essence of Section 36 charges and the equity positions that have been arrived at in there, and has attempted to look as best as possible at the work program for the year and the way that it's been affected, and to translate it into the most equitable result for the community who pay these charges, and for the wider community who contribute via contributions to science. Got a couple of questions, and I see we have a recommendation around an option 3. I have a question around inclusion of remissions for an inability to exempt, inability to exercise consent. So my understanding is that generally to date that the costs related to consents have been liable irrespective of the ability to exercise, and I wonder whether we're going down a dangerous route in going in that direction. The other thing is around financial hardship, and it seems we've got in this paper 2 tests, and elsewhere in the council a 3rd test of financial hardship. In paragraph 29, we talk about significant financial hardship. In the recommendation itself, we simply talk about financial hardship, and in the rates remission policy, notably it's a rates remission policy, and it's not a Section 36 charge, we talk about extreme financial hardship. So there's a question of consistency there. I think perhaps the answer might be in this case that there is a body of work still to be done around criteria, developing the criteria. So, and that would address that. So we may well be safe in just saying financial hardship is the test, but it has to be defined in detail. If you could comment on those 2 issues, please.
I think on the first one around the ability to exercise consent, I take your point that yes, that is slightly different to the the basis of the Section 36 charges overall, and that it may be better that that was worded around the financial hardship rather than any ability to exercise consent because of damage. The damage that is caused by the cyclone to a property that has a resource consent has effectively caused financial hardship, so that is then the criteria for actually doing it. So we only actually need the one comment there rather than two, or one criteria. In terms of the financial hardship one, yes, I agree that actually it would be probably better to be quite consistent with our rates remission policy in talking about extreme financial hardship and actually setting a definition, the criteria that we'll need to quickly work through that helps us assess these types of consents as well as our rates ones under a similar, simple type of methodology for ratepayers to be able to apply.
Thank you.
Thank
If I
you,
could just
Chris.
a supplementary question on that, if I may, and it just relates to the financial hardship. So the concept of a Section 36 charge is it applies to the consent that's attached to a property. Is the intention that the financial hardship is assessed purely in relation to the costs of that consent and that property? So if a consent holder has multiple consents, are they addressed in terms of their overall financial capacity, or is it assessed individually at the property level? And so are we better to relate an exemption to a specific consent?
I believe that it would be more equitable to actually relate it to the specific consent, so the property that the resource consent is issued against. And so therefore, if someone has multiple properties, 9 of them may be absolutely fine, but one is devastated, we would assess the extreme financial hardship against that one to relate it on that consent.
Thank you.
If we can get some consent on that, some consensus on that, then we can maybe look at just a slight
Tweak. Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Sears.
Thank you. Just some really basic questions of understanding it from a practical side from our ratepayers. So we understand from Mr. Maxwell the change in public good, that's quite clear. And then we have the secondary issue, which is we have ratepayers who have suffered severe loss of the consequence. So the Section 36 charges will be invoiced out as usual to everybody who receives them. And I'm assuming then that we'll have a discussion around the criteria that will go with those invoices. And then individually, they'll be able to apply in quite a simple way back to us to ask for this remission based on this criteria. So all of that information will go out to ratepayers because we know how difficult it is to be dealing with paperwork and things at the moment. And then they'll individually come back because it's by exemption and request, not by any other assessment. Is that how it'll work?
That would be how it works. Every year when we send out our annual freshwater science charges, we include a leaflet, and there are 2-page leaflet re-explaining how the charges are calculated and that. And what we would do is add a section into there about the remission policy that we would have in place for them.
Excellent.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Just one, Madam Chair. In terms of setting the fee, it's based on the actuals incurred, as I understand it. Is that correct, or the forecast for that? Is it a full year's budget, is it? Full year budget. And there's no scope, given that we're setting the rate for the current year, the fee for the current year, you're basing that on your budgeted year.
Correct. That's the fees are set as part of the annual plan budget at the start of the year, so it's a fixed fee schedule and published in advance.
And it's based on the previous year's actuals? Is that how
no,
that
current year budget.
But the budget is set based on the previous year's actuals?
Budget is influenced by previous years as well as the program of work that would be coming up for the current year. So as you know, through an annual plan cycle there, yes, the previous year is a starting point in a lot of cases, but actually what we're going to be doing in the next year, if that significantly increases, would increase the budget for the current year.
Based on Mr. Maxwell's comment that it's those costs that are incurred are recovered through the fee, that's my understanding of how that operates. So you're saying that it's driven by the budget, and if we speculate that the budget has a whole host of elements into it, building the budget. How does that relate to recovering from the consent holder the actual costs involved in delivering the service?
So it's through the revenue and financing policy which defines how those activities are funded. So that's where the 35%, 65% comes in. So if we've got an annual plan of work, which is a budget of this expenditure, that sets the revenue expectation of 35% of those costs. And therefore we set the fees in order to achieve that 35% revenue target.
And as we need to set the fees and charges as part of our annual plan at the start of the year, we need to use our best estimate of the actual expenditure for that year, which at that point in time is our annual plan, the budget and our annual plan.
Does that help clarify, Councillor Curtin?
I don't want to take it offline, but
yes.
when we come to set the fees for next year and we're substantially underspent in this current year, which we are, then we would certainly carry forward the expenditure, actual expenditure into that next year, surely.
That would be part of our annual plan discussion for next year, that if we were able to fund some of it from an underspend this year, or there was a change in the delivery because we couldn't do some of the work for next year, that would reduce the budget for that and therefore reduce the fees and charges.
That's okay.
Thank you. I think we'll come to a close with questions. So moving on to the recommendations. We have 1, 2, then we have 3, and within 3 we have 4 options. The first option I'm hearing is a no. Then we have option 2 and 3, and then the possibility of a 4 if there is an alternative approach. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think for the reason that Councillor Harding raised, and we're in our long-term plan, it says very clearly that the fact you can't exercise a consent is not a reason not to pay a science charge. We should excise the words have been unable to exercise their consent from both options 2 and 3. And so that the decision point is one of, is it a one-off fee exemption structure where you've got financial hardship with a test yet to be workshopped, or is it that plus the 42% transfer of any remaining spend to general rates under option 3? So I just think if you take those words off the table,
yes,
then it just takes one element of clutter out of this decision-making tree.
Yes.
So I'm minded to myself go for option 3 on the basis that we would, in doing so, probably have an administratively simpler process, one that, as a matter of principle, transfers burden to public where expenditures incurred with the public benefit, but on top of that, an ability, if there's any remaining hardship for a property on an objective basis, to come to us for a remission of the remaining fee. That's where I'm at, Madam Chair.
I second that.
And you second that? Okay.
Well,
so
point of order, I guess. Then.
Yeah. What we'll do first is we'll go through the 2 options and we'll try and get to a place of consensus if we can. Councillor Harding?
Yep, thank you, Chair. Look, just building on the point that one of the points that I raised before and discussed with Chris is a question about whether we are linking this to the individual consent. And I'd just like to suggest that if we are going down that track, which I do recommend, and has been supported by staff, that we need a couple of extra words. And so, for the sake of completeness and good English, both options could read fee exemptions where consent holders, and these are the new words or the new end of the sentence, where fee exemptions where consent holders are experiencing financial hardship due to Cyclone Gabrielle damage to the consented property.
Right.
So, to the consented property is the key addition there, and a couple of extra bits of English.
Okay. Right. Councillor Van
Still
Beek.
happy to second.
Okay. With that addition? Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
I couldn't do the English.
Yeah.
It works well.
Right.
Are we allowed to ask questions to that or not? I can't remember.
Yeah, go on. We're trying to build consensus here.
Just so for consistency and to be clear going forward, my hope is this isn't the only remission type policy that we consider to support our community. So, and any other example, such as Chris's, where a consent holder might have 9 other consents on different properties that are all going fine, it could be the same with someone with 9 other houses that are fine and 1 red stickered, and we would consider it just on the 1 red stickered property base.
Great question.
Yeah. So what I heard earlier,
I'm just, everyone's always concerned about being consistent, and so I just want to check that that's well thought through.
I would say we simply just haven't got to a rates and remission policy, so we haven't had the opportunity to think that one through. But I agree with you, consistency as far as is possible and practical.
Yeah. Can we have some advice around Section 36 charges assessed per consent?
Are they assessed per consent or per property?
They're assessed per
A single
consent.
property could have
Per
more than one
consent.
consent.
No, sorry, but they are per consent.
Consents have a site, but the consent's linked to a consent holder, not the property. It just happens to be at a site.
To the holder.
Katrina may clarify that better for us.
I happen to be the owner of the largest consent in Twyford as a global consent. And so, once again, there's a big complication in amongst that because it's one consent with multiple properties. Some will be affected, some won't be. So, but that's an anomaly, and I think we can work that through.
I think that's going
We
to be
can't
the
fix
value
that.
of the criteria when we build it, because it is getting quite complex outside of what's been asked of us today.
And the norm, I think, we're very close.
Yeah, Chris?
I was just going to say, as part of the criteria, we would look to say, well, what is the total value that we're assessing against of all the properties that are impacted or around that consent, divided by the amount that was lost in there, so that we could ensure that it was a fair percentage on the amount that we were assessing.
Councillor Curtin?
I'm just smiling to myself. The point that we've got a resolution on the floor, on the table. It's been moved and seconded, so we clarified the resolution. So are we in debate? How are you treating that matter?
Well, I think we could go back to it. So what was proposed was option...
flagpole.
Yeah. Yep, is option 3, removing being able to exercise their consent. Yep. Adding in consent holders who are experiencing damage due to the cyclone and attributed to the consented holder. The consent holder. Property.
Madam Chair, would be or financial hardship to the consented property due to the cyclone. That's the motion that I've got on the table. I just, as a tidy up, what's missing from that is the no low flow charge. There needs to be another.
That's next.
Yeah, that's next. We'll just deal with the 3.
Yeah, I see that's 4.
Yeah.
Apologise.
I wonder if I could, we run into a problem with the property scenario. Are we better to make the hardship assessment against the consent holder? So we overcome.
Yes.
I mean, in Gerard's case, huge impact on the consent holder. So is that a better way of framing that, you think?
Right. So I'm unclear on what the wording, I was running with Councillor Harding's amendment to my amended motion.
Which was consented property, so conflated the two, in fact.
So what should it now say, Councillor Harding?
Can I read what I've got?
Yes,
Would
please.
that help?
Yes.
So it's option 3, reduce the annual freshwater science charges to all discharge consent holders by 42%, representing a change in water quality business as usual activity for 5 months, and proceed, etc., and proceed with annual freshwater science charges and water measuring device administration fees for the water tank consent holders as per the annual plan, fees and charges schedule, and accept requests for one-off fee exemptions where consent holders have been experiencing financial hardship due to the cyclone.
Yes, sounds good.
So the section 36 charges are assessed per consent.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's judged on whether or not the consent holder is experiencing financial, and it'll only be applied to those consents that they hold.
Are you happy to move that? And are you happy to second that?
Yep.
Councillor Harding?
It's got its problems, but
Sorry, that was my hand up to talk, if I may. So that description related again back to the consent holder rather than the individual charge. My point is that we're on safer ground, and I think this is where staff were at. We're on safer ground relating it to the individual property rather than the whole business.
Yeah. We've got a mover and a seconder. Okay.
Yeah, and that was where my amendment was at, because my amendment was not what was read out.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is getting very complicated. Can I suggest that we sort this with the criteria that support it?
Absolutely. So we still have a second stage of criteria to build to clarify. So we've got a mover and we've got a seconder.
Yep.
And would you like to speak to those any further than what you have?
No, I think I've explained my rationale for moving that over option 2.
yeah, and just further from that is that the motion is not perfect, and I hope that in further discussions around the criteria, we will be able to iron those out and make it clear.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Councillor Curtin.
Madam Chair, we're really making a sow's ear out of this one, and the reason is that we haven't kept it simple and the communication very straightforward. That's why option 2 was clearly the superior option, and I won't be supporting option 3 on that basis, that we lack that precision that's needed in a situation where all of those consent holders need absolute clarity that the issue is around financial hardship and that on its own. And I'm suggesting that that's why I won't support option 3, is we fall into the trap on day one with the decision, and all the advice coming to us is communicate, 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 and do it as well as you can. This is not doing that.
Any other speakers? Councillor Harding.
So with all due respect, Councillor Curtin, I can't let that one lie, because I think we reached a position where we thought that the only difference between option 2 and option 3 was the 42% discount, and so the rest of the complexity still sits on the table.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to support the motion as amended, if you like. I'm just really happy with the intent here that we're finally getting on to some good support for some of our community. This is only the start. We've got a long way to go, and because of that long way to go, I just would hate to see us, get stuck on things like this. As Councillor Van Beek said, it's not perfect, but it's a start. Let's just get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Right of reply, Councillor Williams.
Madam Chair, I really hesitate to raise this, but I do so as a matter of safety for the organisation. It has been disclosed in this discussion that Councillor Van Beek is a consent holder. And I'm wondering if it wouldn't be safer if I've moved it, if a councillor who is not a consent holder were to second it. And then we can see how the votes fall. I just want to keep this as safe. I don't want anyone thinking it's tainted. I know it's not, but I just think that may be the safer way to go.
Stuart Nash about that.
Well, we've got Councillor Foley who's happy to accept being the seconder and also happy there.
So Madam
Thank you.
Chair, as a matter of process, so the mover and seconder withdrawing their motion?
No,
No.
I moved it. I'm
Yep.
just inviting someone else to second it, and if you want to have the discussion
And-
again, fine.
And we've had a
Willing to withdraw
replacement and a
Peter
seconder.
second.
A
Motion's live
replacement
and we've had
seconder.
discussion on it.
Yep.
It's a matter of whether it
Replacement
goes to vote.
seconder.
Saying it
Yep.
should be withdrawn.
Oh, well, if you want to go through and redo the last 10 minutes for the sake of form, we could do that.
And I think there's a good point around the communication of how this goes out to the public. And I think that's a crucial part of the workshopping the criteria, that we make it clear that our intentions are to acknowledge hardship amongst those who have been impacted the most in our region, and that we acknowledge that, and this is a form of how we can help and assist those in hardship. Okay. So for end of discussion, I'm proposing 1, 2, 3.3 that has been amended, moved by Councillor Williams and seconded by Councillor Foley. I'll do those separately. All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against?
Against?
Councillor Curtin, and recorded, please. Those who abstain? That is carried. Moving on to recommendation 4. Are there any movers or seconders?
Happy to move that.
Councillor Foley, second by Councillor Sears. Would you like to speak? Any other speakers? None. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Chris, Susie and the team, and Katrina. Thank you. Moving on to item 7, report and recommendations from the Regional Transport Committee. Would you like to introduce this, Councillor Williams as chair of this committee?
All right.
Or give a brief summary before handing it over to Katrina if there's anything else to add. Kia ora.
Thank you. Well, look, the interesting part about this is that this was probably the last meeting of a council committee before the cyclone. And I can recall sitting just over there, and we were starting to get some murmurings that perhaps things were going to be a bit more serious. There was a lot more activity on the ground that the council was taking to prepare for it. The reason I raise that is one of the points we talk about there is to do with the regional land transport investment delivery. In the lead up to the next regional land transport plan, we have had an investment logic mapping workshop series before Christmas. And the number one problem that we're seeking to tackle in that process is resilience. And it was discussed and agreed amongst the whole committee, including the TAG, that Hawke's Bay is enormously vulnerable with its road connections, particularly to the north, to an event of that kind. And we had throughout the year been experiencing in Central Hawke's Bay and in Wairoa a whole range of problems for the rural road network as a result of just how wet that year was and the instability to the point where the Central Hawke's Bay was spending its annual budget in a month just standing still. So resilience had been already on our radar just as that cyclone was 3 days before it hit. And we're now in a position where just about every assumption of our previous long-term regional transport plan now needs to be revisited, and we need to think long and hard as a region about what building back better and more resilient means going forward, and that's very much going to be front and centre for the coming regional land transport plan process, which will be notified next year. So it really has reset things. I know at central government there has been a reset towards adaptation rather than mitigation, and that's a big conversation in itself, but there's some changes in priority there coming through in the government policy statement, and equally there has been some movement in government position around speed management. which is going to have some pretty significant implications for topics in this paper as well. So I guess my point is, while we're on the brink of that event when this meeting happened, a lot has changed since, and we are going to need to move with that. So that's some context to the paper in a broader way. So those are the points I really wanted to share. I guess just to explain the speed management part of that, it really is much focused through the lens of the Road to Zero program and a new speed management rule, which basically puts the coordinating function on the regional council for a regional approach to speed reduction, albeit that each of the territorial authorities would feed up as the road controlling authorities around their specific priorities. So it's a new way of doing things, and we've focused on schools, kura and marae as priority areas in that regard. We added at the meeting active transport corridors to those recommended to ensure that there was, we had an absolutely amazing paper presented to that committee from Joanna Burrell, and she talked about how if you're going to have active transport routes, you need to ensure that the speed of approach to a roundabout where bikes are is actually sensible for that, encouraging that option. So, yeah, I guess that's some introductory comments. I just have one procedural issue that I wanted to note. The terms of reference that are referred to in the paper in paragraph 1.1 are different from those, slightly different from those adopted by this council on 16 November. And the material change is around paragraph. What I have to do is, because of the way this, I have to take photos of other resolutions so that I can actually read one thing against the other. But the active transport one read as resolved on 16 November, bear with me, plan and promote and plan for active transport in the region. And item 5 was plan and advocate for emissions reduction through multimodal activities. The rest of it appears to be as resolved on the 16th November, but the agenda for the Regional Transport Committee meeting was to approve the terms of reference as adopted by this committee on the 16th November. That wording needs to be adjusted, I think, to what we resolved to adopt on 16 November and was put to the committee on 10 February. In short, 5 and 6 need to go back to the way they were on 16 November. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Katrina, hand it over to you. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, yes, correct. Councillor Williams, those changes were made, we thought, to reflect the governance of the Regional Transport Committee, not the doing of what the TAG would be doing. I appreciate that as a change, and we can take that back through the RTC for consideration.
Thank you. Any more to add on the paper?
No, Councillor Williams has covered it.
Questions or comments for Katrina or Martin in terms of what's presented? Councillor Van Beek.
Yeah, I've got a question. Under the terms of reference, advisory members, there is the Hawkesbury Regional Active Transport Committee, named to be confirmed, representing active transport to be confirmed. Can you explain to me who may make up that particular active transport committee?
Through you, Chair, we weren't determining that. That was for the community to determine.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions, comments? No. So we have our recommendations there. Given those changes have to be made back at the Regional Transport Committee? Yep. Yes. So everything in here is correct to just approve
No,
today?
Councillor Williams is correct that there is a change to the terms of reference on this, so we can revert back to the original that was proposed and adopted. I'll bring a paper to the RTC on those two matters.
That's fine.
But we could probably just delete 1.1 because we don't need it. We've already adopted the terms of reference as a council.
Is that correct? And delete 1.1?
we just delete that for now, then that can go back through the RTC route back to here. In the meantime, we've got a standing terms of reference that we adopted on the 16th.
Except that it was amended by the Transport Committee.
Oh, I
It
see.
came here already.
Well, how about we adopt the terms of reference as recommended at the meeting on 10 February? Yeah, well,
Yeah, we can do that.
I think that actually the resolution reads correctly. It's just what's attached to the paper isn't what we did.
I don't think RTC adopted them. Is that correct, Leanne?
Okay. Well, we have the current recommendations
recommended
that
them.
seem to be correct, and if any additions or changes need to be made, it could be back at the joint committee.
Correct.
Yep.
Well, I certainly don't want this council to hear at this meeting adopt the terms of reference that are attached to this paper. That's what I don't want to happen. I want to be very clear about that.
No, not with those other two, what were those two amendments?
Clause 5 and 6 of the terms of reference, both have been changed, and the original terms of reference that were recommended by the RTC were to plan and provide, not monitor and provide.
So Martin will take your direction on moving this paper just to proceed on to the next item based on your direction here.
I'm stumped, frankly, in a procedural vortex here, and
Through you, Chair, I think if I can help, I think that, and look, I'll apologise, I thought that I was assisting, clearly not. I think that we can adopt the terms of reference with the change to terms of reference clauses 5 and 6 back to plan and provide, not monitor and provide.
Fantastic. Can we have
Is that correct, Councillor Williams?
yeah, well, the wording was. I think we need to.
Should still have the wording.
I've got the wording here. It's not quite that. It's promote and plan for active transport for 6, and plan and advocate for.
Right.
For emissions reduction. And with that wording, I would be happy to adopt terms of reference.
Yep.
Got that, Leanne?
Yes.
Right. So we have a mover, Councillor Williams, and a seconder, Councillor Van Beek. Are there any other comments? There are none. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 8, which is the HBRIC and Food East 23-24 draft statement of intent and quarterly update. We got kia ora, Tom. And Jess. And Jess.
Good afternoon, everybody. This paper has ended up being a bit of a combined effort because we've lost a couple of meetings, and so you just have to bear with me as we work through that. And I might actually flip it around and do the statements of intent at the end because we kind of need a fair bit of feedback on that. So if we just skip past those and go to page 26 or the HBRIC quarterly update, and we'll mostly just take that as read, just in the interest of time, and
Yep,
happy
sure.
to answer any questions from there forward.
Are there any questions around the quarterly update? No? We can proceed? Yep, thank you.
Okay, well, thanks,
Brandon?
Jess. If you could. Oh, this is going really well.
Can we just back up the track slightly?
Yes,
Yes.
Councillor Harding?
Yeah, just 15.4 of the paper, statement of financial position. An increase in net assets, I was trying to follow the logic here, increase in net assets of 6.8 million year to date due to a drop in a share price and losses.
Yeah.
So how can you make a profit out of drops in share prices and losses, please?
So that is, we're looking at December, that is an increase due to the increase in the share price.
Thank you.
So apologies for that, yeah.
Just so that people would read the papers, you put that in there, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great, yeah.
We all failed.
Not saying. And there was
pointed
a
out
slight
to 'em.
increase as well in the managed funds at December as well, so it was the other way around.
Any other questions around the
Yeah, I had a
quarterly report?
in there, I just don't, we're talking of aspirations of $600 million by 2030. That's...
Is this the statement of intent?
Actually, that may be the statement of intent.
Yeah.
It is the statement of intent.
Come back to that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. We'll just address any financial quarterly report updates issues.
Just one comment really is thank you, Jess, for a very, very clear set of financial statements. It's so refreshing.
Oh, okay, Tom.
Okay, so back to the start. Council CCOs, CCTOs are required under the Local Government Act to have a thing called a statement of intent. And there is quite a lot of procedure around. They have to be reviewed every year and confirmed every year, and there are some and so they need to be done by the end of June. And there's a process whereby these statements of intents have to go through the CCTO's own boards and then back to the shareholder, the ultimate shareholder, which is you, for feedback, and then and so this will circle back to you. As I mentioned earlier, we were taking draft statements of intent to the HBRIC board. The end of February meeting that could circle back to the corporate strategic in March, but Cyclone Gabrielle's taking care of that. So a bit of a disservice to the HBRIC directors in the fact that we're kind of bringing them all to you in kind of one hit, rather than there are abilities to write to people to get extensions and things like that, but we just thought you've got more important things to do, and we'll just buzz through. And then there's also a second part to that in relation to the workshop you had this morning, is that there is there's a lot of work going on around HBRIC, and so we've effectively what we're recommending to you is some very light touch changes to that HBRIC statement of intent, and the understanding that there may be some decisions made or some recommendations made that will justify a more deeper dive back into that document, and so would be almost premature to go through a sort of a process now when there's potentially changes in the wind. And so so you've got two statements of intent here. You may look at them, and there may be a number of things that are that we'll be grateful to receive feedback on, but ultimately, we anticipate that we'll be triggering another process in the near future to come back to you, separate from the Food East statement of intent, which again is just running as business as usual. And so, just before we sort of take feedback on these documents, just don't want to assume. We often get confused between a SIPO and a statement of intent, and what is a statement of intent and what is a SIPO. And so the SIPO, which is again was something that was discussioned, there's actually a definition for it. It's a statement of investment policies and objectives, I think. And when you hear the word SIPO, the SIPO is a document that relates specifically and exclusively to Council's managed funds portfolio, and it directs the managers of those funds on how they are to invest. And so that is a very specific document for a very specific purpose. The statement of intent really is a much broader document that really sort of, where a publicly owned entity is telling you what it stands for, what it's trying to achieve, and making sure that there's annual accountability back for any of the progression for there. So if you can park any thoughts you might be having around SIPOs and managed funds to one side, this is the organisation statement of intent. And look, at the last thing, and we heard it this morning, is that there's sometimes interchangeably used, determined with a letter of expectation, and it might be that in the middle of the year you have a different view, or you'd like HBRIC to do something, you can also write a letter of expectation to it, which kind of almost, provides a sort of a flavour or a gloss over the current statement of intent. So, any questions on the difference between a statement of intent and a SIPO?
To Williams.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, look, I just have one question. Minimum cash yield greater than 2% per annum is highlighted. What did that used to say?
So we are in the HBRIC SIPO?
Yeah, no, the HBRIC statement of intent, page 4.
I don't think we did change it.
Page 4.
Oh.
What was your question, Martin? Sorry?
What did it used to say? Has that changed, and what did it used to say?
Sorry, if you just refer to which paragraph you...
Sorry, it's on page 4. There's a comment, JB4, minimum cash yield greater or equal to 2% per annum. What's changed there? What did it used to say? Did it used to say 6%? Or something?
I think what the comment there is actually saying that we anticipated that that's something that would be of interest to you, and we're recommending that something we revisit.
It hasn't changed. This is one of those. We'll do that after the investment strategy.
See where you get to. Yeah.
So it hasn't changed. Thank you.
I'll try and keep the questions relevant, bearing in mind that things are likely to change. Just looking at Food East, as a comment, actually, I felt the purpose in that is great. It's quite definitive and quite aspirational. Notwithstanding that, under strategic objectives, first one's pretty clear, but on B of the strategic objectives on top of page 5, I wasn't actually sure what that meant or whether it was just blah, and in that context whether it was necessary or not.
I wouldn't suggest for 1 second that a document contained any blah in it. Look, I think the Food East project, and Councillor Curtin's probably got the longest history on this, was a product of the Provincial Growth Fund phase. Actually, in Councillor Sears, you've actually probably got the longest history with this. So there was definitely, as a part of that process, there were some commercial objectives that were being sought, but I think it was just the nature of the fact that the Provincial Growth Fund in there and is also looking for some social outcomes. And I think Hastings District Council, the original promoter of the project, would have been looking for those too. So.
Okay. And just one further point of interest, really, we make reference in the timeline there to prospective tenants on board in about 15 months' time. Do some of those tenants in the wind or teed up at all?
Yeah, so the board is actively looking at that. So they've been through an active process, and actually it's mentioned in the update. They've had a workshop with sort of food industry leaders to try and flesh that out. And it's also worth mentioning that the owner of this HBRIC has got an ability to appoint up to 4 directors and is currently in a process to add directors to that board, thinking more about that future as well as the construction project.
Councillor Harding.
Just a question, if I may, please, on periodic reporting. And there seems to be a little bit, I'm not entirely clear from the document, but this is the statement of intent as to what we should expect on page 4, or page 6, depending on your point of view of the document. So page 4 of the document itself, page 6 of the PDF.
Which SOI?
This is HBRIC. Okay. Talks about a change from twice annually. There's a note about changing from twice annually. So formal group and parent company financial statements. And I guess that means, normally I would expect to see audited or reviewed or something like that as opposed to formal. So that there's a little bit of seed of doubt about what's intended there. But wait, there's more, because then if you go down one page, objective 2, HBRIC submits 4 times quarterly written reports, and not quite sure what would be in those reports, but wait, there's more. If you go to page 8, the final paragraph in 9, it talks about a half-yearly report within 2 months at the end of the date each financial year, update on financial performance and investing activities. So there's just a bit of. So in all of that, I think there was an intention to get away from formalised financials on a half-yearly basis, was there?
Correct.
So, which on the one hand, I would expect that some kind of management accounts, at least on a half-year basis, would be achievable and reasonable.
Correct. It was just the formal group accounts, because trying to do the consolidated accounts on a twice-yearly basis with a different balance date is actually incredibly difficult.
So my request would just be to provide a little bit more clarity and specificity about what we can expect in half-yearly financials. Quarterly would be lovely on a management basis. Half-yearly would be sufficient.
So in terms of quarterly reports, you've just seen one.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
And the auditors helpfully, one part of the auditor's recommendation was when we said that we do quarterly reporting, they asked us that we could specify that was in fact 4 times a year. So we found guidance to be incredibly helpful and
Thank you. Councillor Van Beek?
No, I had no questions.
No, sorry.
Oh.
Councillor Curtin?
Oh, okay. Look, these two papers, or the two statements of intent, really are challenging for someone on the autism spectrum such as myself, because then, just like others, we've gone through and said we need to change this, that, and the other thing, and I've resisted having to do so in the light that we are on the cusp of very significant change to that. We've got a paper today around performance, which has various recommendations in terms of changing not only HBRC's SIPO, but also producing an HBRIC SIPO in itself. And they will be matters which will need to find their way into, is it now, Tom, a letter of expectation will be the interim measure between a statement of intent tabled by the 30th of June and a consequential change in terms of the discussions we're having. Is that
so? You can trigger a change of a statement of intent at any time. Yes, the HBRIC can and council can. So you can initiate that. So I think let's see where the outcome gets to, and then we'll figure out. Okay, well, let's go back to the SIPO. I mean the SIPOs, the statement of intents, and figure out how we're going to reflect those changes, whatever they may be.
So in the meantime, we're simply going with the flow in terms of the process requirement to get this over the line by certain dates, and the certain knowledge that we're going to come back and re-engineer them quite significantly.
That's correct.
Just to give some context, if you don't mind, Madam Chair, to some excellent questions raised by my colleague, Councillor McIntosh, as to the direction of travel, particularly of Food East. It needs to be prefaced by the knowledge that this is a joint venture and partnership with the Hastings District Council and a private individual. It is substantially funded by government, who had certain aspirational goals, not only to get themselves re-elected back into office, but also to promote the regional development of the region. And as a consequence, those social goals and aims are sitting there, and one wonders in the future whether in fact we should include them there, but for the sake of the optics, they are there. So that gives a bit of a context for why those types of outcomes are included in what we would regard HBRIC to be pursuing as a quite commercially focused approach to its investment portfolio.
I understand completely, Councillor Curtin, and I'm very happy to withdraw the word blah.
We better blah back this season.
Any further questions for Jess? Yeah, sorry, Councillor Foley.
Jess and Tom. Well, basically to lift us back up, take the lead of very excellent presenter we had earlier, and I'm looking right at the mission statement, point 2 on page 1. And when I read that, I see, I think, an excellent mission statement for what it's been doing, which is optimising and physically providing financial strategic returns to council. What I don't see in that, and then for council to achieve its strategic vision, what I don't see in that is anything about HBRIC itself growing capital, increasing those returns, any sort of long-term thinking. And that's kind of, I think, we've already sort of had it highlighted to us, and if not worked it out ourselves, that the current setup has been quite short-term thinking, basically stripping all the returns out of HBRIC, passing it back as a dividend to council, but just not enabling HBRIC itself to grow, and taking into account things like inflation and the poor years along with the good years, potentially not going ahead at all of standing still at best. So I'd like to see some work go into that to better present what we collectively as a council want to see HBRIC going forward.
I think it's really incredibly, I don't want to use the word exciting, I don't want to overdo it, but it's, I think it's a really exciting time for HBRIC. I think it's clearly that's well understood, and there's some really good opportunities to lead that up and continue what I think has been a great 4-year run for HBRIC. So it's, it's a lovely next step.
Chair, I'd just like to make one final statement that I think when HBRIC comes across our agenda in future, we want to think back to the presentation we just had from Scott this morning and had earlier. So we are them in 2010, and look where they are now, and look to the benefit that provides to their ratepayers, $42 million per annum to subsidise rates. So to endorse your thought, Tom, it is a massive opportunity for us. It's one of the most important things we can get right.
Absolutely. Any other question, comment? All right, thank you. We will just have a mover and a seconder for recommendations 1, 2 and 3. Councillor McIntosh, it's a mover. Councillor Harding, thank you.
Just a question, there's some blanks in
There are some
recommendation
blanks.
3, so do we...
Are those blanks supposed to be there?
It was only for any agreed feedback to be noted there.
Sure, I did note that I'm just seeking a little bit more clarification about what was expected in terms of that.
So we've taken those notes. So I apologise for walking away from the table. We'll provide that feedback back to both those organisations, and then these documents will come back to you for final approval in May, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, so maybe I could suggest that 3.1 could read, further clarity on expectations for regular financial reporting.
Madam Chair?
Yep.
I've actually got a whole series of amendments to go through, and maybe we suggest that feedback be provided directly to Tom Skirman, so that and they're brought back to the next iteration.
Yes,
so
please, because
if anyone's got any other amendments or changes, we can bring those
forward, please. Yeah. So if we just go back to the 1, 2 and 3, noting that there will be time to feedback. Comply. So the mover and seconder. Yeah. All those who agree say aye. Aye. All those against carried. Thank you very much. We move on to our significant activities in transition to Cyclone Gabrielle recovery. Who would like to lead this item? No, this is one more item before public excluded. Yeah, so we're on item 9.
Chair, we can take the paper as read and respond to any questions.
Okay. Taken as read, do we have any questions for exec or Pieri? Councillor Sears.
Start. Thank you. Through you, Chair. First, maybe to Chris, asset management. Chris, just really want to acknowledge that your team and your 13, I think now, rapid response teams. 17 now.
They're growing.
The rumour is out, and I think you need to speak to it. Gossip. You've done a year's work in apparently 6 weeks. Is this true?
So in terms of cash flow we had, yeah, and it just so it just shows you what can be done when everyone's working together in the one direction and everyone shares that common goal of putting our protection back in place. And massive kudos to the team and all of our contractors who've really pulled out all the stops and they've been working really hard. So it's fantastic, but we're not resting on our laurels. There's still plenty of work to continue. And we'll obviously celebrate when we get all of the work done, but that's still a way off.
Well, yeah, a huge thank you, and I've heard it 3 times over the last week. Compliments on your team, compliments on the way they're working with contractors, and amazement actually at the amount of work that's been done. And we're all aware here that it's coming on the back of 7 days a week from you over many weeks. So I just want to say a huge thank you, because if there's one thing our community really needs to see, it's the work being done now to ensure that we're going into winter in a good situation. So thank you. I do have some questions. Should I go through all the different departments with my few questions?
Yes.
Just on gravel extraction, I see there's been invitations to Tangata Whenua to set up an industry meeting around the gravel extraction. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. I didn't know if that was the normal process, but is that how that usually happens, or is it new? Because I think it's a fantastic way to approach it.
Yeah, so that's part of our new consent, that we have these Tangata Whenua operational groups who help advise, and we can also inform those groups about what's happening. So that's a new part of how we operate under the new consent. I think the other thing there that industry would be happy to see, there's 900,000 cubic metres of material being provided for industry to fix our roads, to fix our bridges, to grade concrete, all those sorts of things. And we're still a little bit behind in some of the survey, so we're having to make some judgments, but we're working with industry to have quite a permissive process through all of that. So.
That's what I thought, and that's what I've been hearing back, again, through channels, that's working really well, so thank you for that. I also wanted just a quick update. You note in 29 that you've got support from Environment Southland, Otago Regional Council, Environment Canterbury and Bay of Plenty. So have all those councils stepped in and brought staff and resources in to help us?
That's right. So they're on a bit of a sort of a revolving process. So we get people up for 1 to 2 weeks and they're helping us. So they're engineers and technical people from those other organisations. That's been really helpful, just to help bolster our numbers and get through all of the inspections, etc., at a much faster rate. Plus, too, it's great just having a different perspective on some of our issues. So a big thank you to all of those organisations for allowing their staff to help us out.
Yes, absolutely, Petey.
And an opportunity to acknowledge in situ, we have Fiona McTavish here from Bay of Plenty, Chief Executive, who's with us. Your staff have been gracious in terms of their contribution to our work, Fiona. Ngā
Kia ora. Thank you. Back to you, Councillor.
Regional Park. So, Ian, thank you to you. I mean, the stock banks are so much more obvious in terms of damage, but just sort of acknowledging your department as well, you know, the damage to our rivers and biodiversity, to our aquatic life, to our coast. It's really a huge thing. So acknowledging the amount of work you're having to put in just for us to assess where that's at, really, and a lot of grief too on what's been lost over this time. Erosion control, on 58, I can see the approach you're taking with the catchment advisors around landowners, and I just want to endorse your comments around prioritising the work that's been invested in already and how we're protecting or restoring areas that can be done. It's a question too, actually. So you'll be going on to farm where there are places that have been planted and we can, or there's been native plantings that we've created fencing for. That's going to be the priority work initially to protect what's there and make stable. Is that the way you're approaching it? And we won't take on new works until we've saved what we can.
Yes, through you, Chair. combination of both. So the priority is absolutely we're fixing stuff that makes sense to fix. So if we've had kilometres of fence destroyed and it's expensive and difficult to reinstate, we probably will defer those. But if there's a section of fence that otherwise protects a assisted reversion project, we'll get in and fix that up. That approach equally applies to our priority ecosystems as well. So we're figuring out which of those we could quickly fix up and make deer and goat proof. But we do have some landowners who are also ready to go with pre-programmed erosion control schemes, and we've got the budget for it, so we're going to get on with those that are ready as well as fixing the bits that need to be fixed.
And, looking at the damage between here and Wairoa, can you speak a little bit about the projects that have been done or at a stage of maturity where they have held, and the kind of difference between planted and non-planted land and how well that's performed in this event?
Yeah, so I can talk anecdotally based on what I've seen both from the air and on the ground. Young, relatively new works won't have survived particularly well, simply because it just didn't have canopy cover to protect the ground underneath it. So, look, young pines, young natives, young poles, they've all suffered similar fate as pasture in many locations, not surprisingly, because, like I say, the ground around them has been exposed. From my observations, again, purely anecdotal, I would suggest that the canopy-covered ground has suffered less impact than the pasture ground in our hill country. We are investing and we have a program of work lined up to quantify that, to get some facts and evidence around that rather than working with the anecdote, so we can start to tell a story about what works and what doesn't. Acutely aware that many of our landowners are looking at their investments in trees and ground and going, would I do that again? Because it, in their minds, hasn't worked. But the fact is that it was just too young to have survived it. So we've got a bit of work to do to understand that and then start that engagement and discussion about the value of that work going forward. So not throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
And we'll see that those sort of quantifications and what's worked and what hasn't. Thank you. I just want to acknowledge 2 and 62, the post-cyclone rural recovery workshops. Your comment, initial investigations indicate communities are not yet ready. And I think that's a really important point for us to remember. We're all very keen to get in and help, fix, and just acknowledging that needs to be at the time and at the pace of communities' capacity to deal with the conversations and the work that needs to be done. So I just want to thank you for that. Maybe I'll just ask one more. Hydrology. Can you just explain again the hydrology, what's back in play, what's not, and what you'd like to have done before winter?
So all of our monitoring network is now reinstated. So the team were in Wairoa recently just doing the last little tidy ups. So the sites are all operational. What we're doing now is we're both looking at the network to make sure that our network coverage is right post-event. So have we got the right recorder stations set up? Some of the sites need to be made more resilient because they've had temporary kind of solutions to get them working, and we're now going back to invest in more permanent and secure setups. That'll take a little bit of time. But they're all operational now, which was the key thing I wanted to see shortly after the event. And we do have the New Zealand Hydrological Society in our region yesterday and today with a technical workshop. And there's quite a lot of discussion amongst the practitioners and the field hydrologists about how to create more resilience and robust monitoring networks, and I'm expecting that stuff will flow back into both our review of the network and our systems and our subsequent investment.
Actually, can I just do one last one on the very last consenting? Yeah,
very short.
Short it is. Just to check in, actually maybe Katrina's not here, maybe someone else can ask, just on Plan Change 9 and Plan Change 7, both of which are going to require quite a lot of resourcing, I think, in terms of people as we go through the Environment Court. We note about the mediation, etc. So I really wanted to check in how we're placed in terms of capacity to respond to these currently. In terms of resourcing. Can anyone answer that, or do we need Katrina?
For you, Chair, I'm up here.
Kia ora, Katrina.
Sorry, I'm doing two meetings
I'm
at
glad
once
you joined
now.
us. Bright timing.
My apologies, I am actually just multitasking here. So in terms of the tank plan change, that is going through somewhat a normal course through the Environment Court. We are seeking some early direction from the court. There are some big questions that have been asked by submissions about rights and interests, and so we are seeking guidance from submitters in the Environment Court on whether first, for a principles base, whether we can sort through those issues, because there's no point going down into individual appeal points if we can't sort those rights and issues matters. So seeking guidance on that, and we. So that is ongoing. It's not a huge amount of work actually for staff at the moment because it's sitting with lawyers. Sorry, the second part was, and I'm scrolling quickly, which was outstanding water bodies. Okay, so yep, got that. So that has been a significant amount of work. Still is a considerable amount of work, but largely sits with one of our senior policy analysts. So I think our capacity is okay at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Katrina. Councillor Curtin.
Chris, no show without a question on your waterways. Can I just take you to, just on gravel extraction? No, look, Napier Waterways, number one, you've said, received little damage. A workshop on urban waterways is deferred. Take you to 1920 Napier Miani scheme review and 30 pump station temporary repairs needing completion. Linking all of those three together, has the storm cyclone really changed the entire framework for particularly the review expected on the 31st, that's Thursday?
So the review of the scheme, we were planning on bringing a workshop to you in early March. That obviously hasn't occurred, so that will get rescheduled, and the consultant's due to finalise a report at the end of March, but obviously we'll take on any comments from that workshop back to finalise the report. So that work is still to be done. It doesn't fundamentally change the recommendations. There's still a lot of work that needs to be, or a lot of investment required in the Napier urban waterway, so we'll bring you all of that detail. In terms of the operating model, so that was looking at our historic ownership model where different organisations own different parts of the same network. That's basically had a delay of a couple of months while we've been deep in response, but we're kicking that along again, and we're very keen for some decisions to be made by council so we can inform particularly the Three Waters entity if there are any changes that's well known before anything is transferred off to Three Waters as part of urban stormwater.
So if I could just reframe my question. You've got the review. We've had, even though there was no damage to the network, the urban network, there are, I would suggest, significant consequences of the storm in any event, and also to the pump stations. I'm thinking particular Mission, those that were inundated. So my question is, sitting amongst the scheme review, will those factors and the impacts of the cyclone outcomes be influential or alter the review findings?
So they may do. That's the question we'll ask our technical team. We haven't asked that question yet. In terms of the mission and Brookfield's pump station, they're out of scope for that work because they are a part of a dedicated scheme that just looks after Awatoto and not the greater integrated Napier scheme. We do know that we need to urgently do some work there to make sure that when we rebuild, we rebuild the correct infrastructure, which will most likely mean that could mean that those pump stations need to be larger.
So they're not part of the Napier Meani scheme?
No, that's just that Awatoto area is
separate.
Cut off because it's quite separate.
Councillor McIntosh.
Similar to Councillor Curtin, no show without a question from me on Clive River dredging. Hey, do you have can you give us a steer timing-wise on that?
So what we've asked is that the team resurvey the level of sediment in the Clyde. We haven't got any strong indication one way or the other in terms of the level of accumulation, and the Clyde being a very slow river and getting sort of a bit of a backflow from the Ngāraroto could actually have more sediment in it. So that's the first question, where exactly is the sediment level? And then again, we were planning on bringing a paper in March, I think, to the EICC for some direction on how we fund the land-based disposal of that dredging. So all that those decisions are still to be made by council, and there's significant cost to dredging that section of the Clyde.
Yeah, look, as I'm sure you're aware, in terms of users, winter is a good time.
Any other questions? Councillor Fernbake.
I'll go first with gravel. Cyclone 1988, Ola, brought a lot of gravel down in certain areas. Has there been any assessment done on what this particular cyclone has brought down and
so not yet.
Impact on our...
Yeah. So not yet. We fully expect there's been significant movement of gravel, particularly into that Roy's Hill, Natarawa area where there is a big basin, and that's where we historically saw large volumes from Bowler deposited. So we're working with industry. Industry have done some surveys of their own. Our surveying, or our proper surveying, requires that we go through the channel, and the river levels have been too high for that work. But it's on the work program to get in there as soon as we can, and we're doing partial surveys to really get things going. So we'll come back probably in 6 or 8 months with a comprehensive survey, and we can just demonstrate to council what the movements have been, where the gravel is, and where it isn't. But from an industry perspective, there's plenty available, and there's plenty of agreements in place.
It's mainly from a flood protection view. Yesterday the question was asked again, why didn't you take gravel from XYZ?
So I guess a generic question, how do we manage gravel? So on a 3-yearly basis, we survey every cross-section on every scheme. We determine whether we have sufficient fairway capacity or sufficient capacity within the river. And where there is gravel, that's when we're making arrangements for industry to remove it. So Herotonga is pretty well placed, and we know that we've had historic issues in the Upper Tukituki scheme due to the economic factors of having that material removed at no cost to the ratepayer. That's our policy position. We could remove more if it was funded through the ratepayer base. So that's just pretty high level summary. Thank you.
Councillor Foley.
Just on stop bank repair, so the Walker Road, that was obviously repaired to put a level of protection back in place. I understand there's work going on about what we could do. What's the actual brief in terms of, the work to do? Is it to build a much stronger or more significant structure there?
So generally the rapid rebuild is to put back what was there. In the case of Walker Road, I think it's been recognised that the solution that was there wasn't optimal, and they're looking for an improved solution. I think they're working with the community and some landowners around how that might work, but we certainly want to put in a permanent enduring solution into that location.
Thank you.
Just Just on gravel extraction, just like to thank the team for the response to the Chile needlegrass zone, and certainly alleviated a bit of pressure down there amongst localised landowners around that area, with a compromise, if you'd like, model that the team came up with. I guess my question is, in hope that now that we're seeing the model, or basically the conditions and everything play out, that we can come up with a longer term solution to kind of still manage Chilean needlegrass and still extract gravel from that zone to kind of alleviate the pressure that people perceive either on the level of service or just the need for gravel and the economic conditions.
Thanks, Councillor Foley. Councillor Harding and then Councillor Rowley. Can we have one each, please? You know, we've got guests waiting.
Okay. So
you can blame someone.
the burning one, sorry for just Chris, and I think one of clarification just around the gravel loads in the rivers.
Yep.
Is it possible to use that LiDAR data that we've collected to do some estimations? So we've got some rough seat of the pants of whether we've filled up a lot or not?
Yeah, so that's what not that particular technology, but we are doing our not fully technical correct surveys, which are required under the consent. So we are doing survey to get us through, and so we're just doing sufficient work in that area.
Is there a practical risk that we've had so much gravel coming into the system that we've created that there is more flood risk now? Do we know or disprove that?
So we can't disprove it, but it's work that needs to be done, and we need to do the correct surveys, which include the underwater part, which LiDAR doesn't generally pick up. Once river levels fall and it's safe to survey through those areas, that work will be done. It's all been teed up with the surveyor. It's really just waiting for the conditions to be right. But it is a massive piece of work, because normally we work on a 3-year sort of rotation. It's going to be a big focus. But I'm not aware, it hasn't been brought to my attention, any immediate risks that we have. The most likely scenario is gravel has moved into areas of deficit, and we know we've got massive industry demand, so it's just a matter of matching that demand up, which we're sort of working through at the moment, and we'll get more refined as we get some better information.
Thank you. Councillor Rodley.
Pressure on, keep it quick. I just wanted to reiterate Sophie's comments on what a fantastic job that ELT you've all done, particularly you, Ian, venturing up into the wilds. Really appreciated that and your team's work. Great to see the rural impact assessment survey. You'll be going out to trusted advisors. Could you just give some clarity on who the trusted advisors are and the RAG group for Wairoa?
So the trusted advisors network are effectively kind of those key connectors or key leaders in the community and our rural professionals. So what we're trying to do is avoid going out to every farm survey, because actually, like the engagement, exactly, they're not ready for that. But we need to build a picture quickly, so that's going to those people who are connected well enough within those rural communities to give us those insights. So that's the first bit. And then the second question was, sorry,
about the RAG for Wairoa.
Are we connected to the RAG? Well, the RAG that exists here in Hawke's Bay nominally covers Wairoa. I don't recall seeing in the calls I've been on Wairoa participation in the RAG. My understanding is that the Wairoa community pointing back towards Tairāwhiti, the door is wide open for Wairoa farming leadership to participate in the RAG down here and would be welcomed. And I think at some point we're going to have to probably drag them back into that conversation, because we want you back with us. And I'm happy to help facilitate that at the right point.
Cool. And so pretty excited about the 14 barbecues we've got coming up. And we can utilise that network, obviously, to feed in replacement for that information sharing.
Yep. And we'll try and get, we're working on trying to get broader staff support into some of those as well, not just the team that are up there. We're working on an option of getting people cheaply up there. So watch this space.
Thank you.
Move the paper be received.
Yeah, and I'm happy to second. And just for those listening, RAG only means Rural Advisory Group. And just to reiterate and thanking our exec and Perry and all the staff that are with you to not only respond the way you have, but also come back to what we would see as business as usual, and the significant activities really demonstrated how much has been achieved. So thank you very much.
Kia ora, Chair.
Kia ora. All those who agree to receive the report say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Kia ora. Thank you. We now move into public excluded. So I'm happy to move that we do so. And can I please have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Harding. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you.